Gaze upon this canvas, a whisper from a bygone era where artistry and elegance intertwine. Observe the delicate brushstrokes, the subtle interplay of light and shadow that defines a face, a moment, frozen forever in time. But what if the beauty we behold is merely a veil, a cunning deception woven with pigments and oils? What if beneath the serene surface a truth far more profound, far more unsettling lies hidden, waiting for the right eyes to uncover its secret? Could a portrait, seemingly innocent, hold the key to a story deliberately buried, a silent scream echoing across centuries? Our journey begins not in a grand museum or a bustling gallery, but within the quiet, hallowed halls of a man whose life is devoted to such whispers. Meet Elias Thorne, a figure as reclusive as he is revered in the esoteric world of art, restoration, and collection. His name, though rarely spoken outside certain circles, carries the weight of legend, primarily for his uncanny ability to unearth forgotten masterpieces from the dustbins of history, breathing new life into canvases long deemed lost or insignificant. Elias was a man who understood the language of silence, the unspoken narratives embedded within the very fabric of art. His home, a sprawling Victorian edifice nestled amidst ancient oaks on the outskirts of the city, was less a residence and more a sanctuary for the neglected beautiful. Every room brimmed with history, antique furniture, stacks of leather-bound tomes, and, of course, art in various states of repair, each awaiting Elias's discerning eye and gentle hand. His passion was not merely possession, but the profound act of resurrection, of peeling back the layers of time, grime, and misconception to reveal the artist's original intent, and sometimes something far more. It was this insatiable drive that led him one crisp autumn morning to a rather unassuming estate sale in a quiet, forgotten corner of the county. The sprawling, if somewhat dilapidated manor hosting the sale was unremarkable, its contents largely mundane, a collection of faded memories from a life slowly being dismantled. Yet, as Elias moved through the echoing rooms, a peculiar energy drew him to a secluded alcove, where, almost hidden behind a stack of dusty furniture, he found it. The Lady of the Azure Veil. The portrait was a breathtaking specimen from the late 18th century, an era of refined grace and intricate detail. It depicted a woman of exquisite beauty, her features sculpted with a delicate hand, framed by an elaborate coiffure. Her dress, a cascade of elegant, flowing silks in a shade of deep, oceanic blue, seemed to shimmer even in the dim light of the room. But it was her eyes that truly captivated Elias. A piercing, striking blue holding a serene, almost ethereal gaze that seemed to follow him, drawing him into the canvas. There was an immediate, inexplicable pull, a magnetic force that bypassed his usual meticulous assessment and went straight to the core of his being. It was more than aesthetic appreciation. It was a profound recognition, as if he had been meant to find her. The piece, despite its clear artistic merit, was listed with a surprisingly low provenance, almost as if its previous owners had failed to grasp its true value, or perhaps its true nature. Yet, Elias felt an unusual sense of urgency, an almost frantic need to acquire it, an instinct that defied rational explanation. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his bones, that this was no ordinary acquisition. He sensed a deeper story nestled within the intricate brush strokes, a quiet mystery waiting patiently beneath the patina of age, beckoning him. It wasn't merely the artistry that compelled him, but an almost palpable presence emanating from the canvas, a silent plea embedded within the serene composure of the lady. The portrait whispered of secrets, of untold narratives, and Elias, with his lifetime dedicated to uncovering the forgotten, felt an undeniable obligation to listen. He secured the painting with an efficiency that belied his usual measured pace, the transaction completed with a swiftness that left the estate agent slightly bewildered. As he carefully wrapped the canvas, preparing it for transport back to his sanctuary, the lady's blue eyes seemed to deepen, a subtle shift that Elias dismissed as a trick of the light, but which nonetheless solidified his conviction that this was merely the beginning. He had found not just a painting, but a puzzle, a silent enigma demanding his attention, promising to unravel a narrative far more complex than any he had encountered before. The journey into its hidden depths was just about to begin. Before we delve into Elias's chilling discovery, Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future explorations into the unknown. The journey home with the Lady of the Azure Veil was imbued with a quiet reverence for Elias Thorne, each turn of the road a gentle testament to the precious cargo nestled securely in the back of his vintage rover. He drove with an unusual slowness, as if the very vibrations of the engine might disturb the slumbering secrets he felt sure were contained within the canvas. Upon arrival at his stately, old-world home, the portrait was carefully, almost ceremoniously, carried into his grand study. This room, a sanctuary of aged wood, leather-bound tomes, and the hushed whispers of forgotten eras, was the heart of Elias's world. He placed the lady on a sturdy easel, positioning her directly opposite a magnificent antique gilded mirror, a family heirloom that had stood sentinel in the room for generations, reflecting countless stories and the passage of time. The mirror, with its ornate frame and slightly foxed glass, now held the serene image of the woman in blue, a silent observer in her new, temporary home. Elias began his meticulous process, an almost ritualistic communion with the art he sought to resurrect. His studio was a symphony of soft brushes, specialized solvents, and the gentle hum of his own focused breathing. He worked under the precise glow of archival lamps, his hands moving with the practiced grace of a surgeon, his eyes missing no detail. The initial cleaning revealed even richer depths to the portrait's colors, the azure of her veil deepening to an oceanic hue, the pearls around her neck gleaming with a newfound luminosity. He felt the familiar thrill of discovery, the quiet satisfaction of bringing a masterpiece closer to its original glory. Yet, as the days turned into a rhythm of focused restoration, faint, almost imperceptible details began to surface, tiny deviations that pricked at Elias's finely tuned artistic sensibilities. He noticed, for instance, a subtle inconsistency in the brushwork around the subject's mouth. While the overall expression was one of serene composure, there were moments, particularly when the light shifted just so, or when Elias himself moved to a different angle, that a fleeting shadow seemed to play upon her lips, suggesting a hint of something else entirely, a suppressed sigh, a nascent tremor of sorrow. It was so subtle, so ephemeral, that he initially dismissed it as an optical illusion, a trick of the ambient light, or perhaps simply an overactive imagination fueled by long hours of intense concentration. He knew the period styles intimately, understood the artist's known techniques, and these faint shifts didn't quite align. He would blink, adjust his position, and the serenity would return, unwavering. Then there were her eyes. Those striking blue eyes which had first captivated him at the estate sale now seemed to possess an unsettling depth. Sometimes, as he leaned in close, applying a delicate solution or carefully removing a speck of accumulated grime, he would catch a glint, a spark within their depths that seemed to follow his movements. It was like the classic illusion of a portrait's eyes following the viewer, but this felt different, more intentional, less an artistic convention, and more a living presence. He'd pause, his breath held, feeling a strange prickle on his skin, only for the effect to vanish the moment he consciously tried to observe it. He told himself it was the varnish, the aging pigments, anything but what his gut instinct whispered. One evening, as twilight deepened and the last vestiges of the sun bled through the tall windows of the study, painting the room in hues of violet and rose, Elias leaned back from the easel, stretching his weary muscles. His gaze drifted instinctively across the room, past the now vibrant portrait, and settled upon its reflection in the grand antique mirror. For a split second, a breath-holding eternity that seemed to stretch and warp time, the woman in the reflection was different. Her serene composure, so carefully rendered in the original, was subtly, undeniably altered. The hint of a smile on her painted lips in the portrait was replaced by a gentle downturn, a shadow of sorrow, and in her reflected eyes a profound concern seemed to bloom, a silent plea that was utterly absent from the original canvas. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, dissolving back into the faithful, serene reflection that mirrored the portrait on the easel. Elias blinked hard. He rubbed his eyes, convinced that the long hours, the fading light, and perhaps a touch of fatigue were playing tricks on his mind. He was a man of logic, of science and empirical observation, not prone to flights of fancy or supernatural leanings. He dismissed it, attributing the momentary distortion to a ripple in the old glass of the mirror, a peculiar angle of light, or simply his own exhaustion creating phantoms in his peripheral vision. Yet, despite his rational dismissal, the image lingered, an indelible imprint on his internal vision. The subtle shift, the hint of sorrow and concern, was too specific, too emotionally charged to be easily forgotten. A quiet, unsettling curiosity began to take root in his mind, a seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of his once entirely rational perception. He found himself returning to the study after dinner, drawn by an invisible thread. He would stand before the easel, ostensibly examining his day's work, but his gaze would invariably drift to the mirror, observing both the portrait and its reflection with a new, almost obsessive intensity. He began to experiment, subtly adjusting the lamps, letting the room darken, watching the play of shadows. He would catch himself holding his breath, waiting, hoping, and dreading what he might see. The calm, scientific detachment he usually maintained when working on a piece began to fray at the edges, replaced by a growing unease, a sense that something profound and inexplicable was stirring in the quiet confines of his study, reflected in the ancient glass. The lady of the azure veil, in her painted stillness, had begun to cast a shadow that extended far beyond the canvas, into the very heart of Elias's meticulously ordered world. Days bled into nights, each twilight deepening Elias's quiet obsession. The portrait, the lady of the azure veil, now dominated his thoughts, its serene beauty a constant, unsettling presence. He had begun to approach the antique gilded mirror with a deliberate, almost ritualistic intent, no longer dismissing the fleeting anomalies as mere optical illusions. He sought them out, his eyes strained, his mind a battlefield of skepticism and burgeoning wonder. Then, one evening, as the last vestiges of the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the study in hues of deep violet and fading gold, it happened again. Elias sat in his favorite leather armchair, a book unread in his lap, his gaze fixed on the mirror's surface, which in turn held the reflection of the lady. The room was silent save for the soft tick of a grandfather clock in the hall. He watched, breath held, as the reflected image of the woman in the azure gown began its subtle yet undeniable transformation. Her lips, so perfectly curved into a gentle, enigmatic smile in the original canvas, seemed to waver, then slowly, imperceptibly, twisted into a faint frown. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible shift, yet it was there, a shadow of sorrow replacing her painted tranquility. His heart hammered against his ribs. Then, her eyes, those striking blue depths, seemed to plead, a silent, desperate plea that pierced through the layers of oil and varnish. And finally, a single, glistening tear, born of no earthly brushstroke, appeared to trace a path down her reflected cheek, catching the dying light before vanishing as quickly as it had materialized. Shock rooted Elias to his chair, a cold dread seeping into his bones. Disbelief warred with the undeniable evidence of his own eyes. This was no trick of the light, no fatigue-induced hallucination. This was real. A chilling realization solidified in his mind. The mirror was not merely reflecting an image, it was revealing something hidden, something alive within the painting's silent depths. His rational, scientific mind, accustomed to the tangible and explainable, reeled. He sprang up, his movements uncharacteristically abrupt, and rushed to the mirror, running his hand over its cool, smooth surface, searching for imperfections, smudges, anything that could distort the reflection. There was nothing. The glass was flawless, pristine. He then turned his attention to the portrait itself, scrutinizing every inch of the canvas. He pulled out a magnifying glass, then a specialized UV lamp, examining the brush strokes, the texture, the pigments. Under the harsh, revealing light, the lady of the azure veil remained exactly as she had been since he acquired her, a masterpiece of the late 18th century, serene, untouched, perfectly preserved. Her smile was unwavering, her eyes held no sorrow, her cheeks no tear. The portrait was static, unchanging, yet the memory of the reflected anguish burned in his mind, vivid and terrifyingly real. The discrepancy was impossible, yet irrefutable. Driven by a desperate need to debunk the impossible, Elias began a series of meticulous, almost frantic experiments. He moved the portrait from the study, placing it in various rooms throughout his sprawling home, hoping to break whatever spell or specific condition was enabling the phenomenon. He covered the antique mirror with a heavy velvet cloth, then replaced it entirely with a modern, unadorned-looking glass. He even brought in smaller, handheld mirrors, positioning them at different angles under different light sources: natural daylight, incandescent bulbs, flickering candlelight. Each time, he approached with a mixture of trepidation and a stubborn hope that he would find a logical explanation. But each time, the results were the same. When the specific conditions were met, almost always a quiet, contemplative moment, particularly as daylight waned or in the soft glow of his study lamp, the reflected image would deviate. The serene smile would again twist into a faint frown, the eyes would plead, the phantom tear would appear, sometimes even lingering for a few precious seconds longer than before. The distress in the reflected lady's gaze seemed to deepen with each manifestation, a silent crescendo of sorrow that chipped away at Elias's composure. He tried to ignore it, to busy himself with other tasks, but the haunting image had taken root in his subconscious, a persistent whisper of the impossible. The escalation was gradual, insidious. What began as fleeting, almost imperceptible shifts in expression in the mirror's surface now held for longer durations. The lady of the azure veil, or rather her reflection, began to hold the altered expressions: a furrowed brow of concern, a subtle tightening of her lips in what appeared to be frustration, a widening of her eyes in what Elias could only interpret as fear. It was as if she was attempting to communicate, to bridge the impossible gap between her painted prison and his living world. Sometimes, he swore, her reflected gaze would follow his movements or even seem to react to his unspoken thoughts, creating an unnerving, silent dialogue between observer and observed. Elias found himself speaking to the reflection, whispering questions into the quiet room, trying to elicit a response, a further sign. He felt a growing sense of dread, a chilling certainty that he was no longer alone in his study. Yet, beneath the fear, a powerful, almost intoxicating desire to understand bloomed. He had stumbled upon a mystery far grander and more terrifying than any art forgery or historical enigma he had ever encountered. This was a living secret, trapped behind glass and canvas, and Elias, the reclusive art restorer, felt an undeniable, compelling urge to unravel it, no matter the cost. His nights were now sleepless, his days consumed by the haunting presence of the lady in the mirror. He knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that his life would never be the same. The painting was not merely an object of beauty, it was a silent, desperate cry for help, and Elias was beginning to listen. Elias's days of merely observing the chilling phenomenon were over. The silent, desperate pleas from the woman in the mirror had irrevocably pulled him from his detached existence as an art restorer. He abandoned all other commissions, the half-finished canvases and tarnished frames gathering dust in his workshop. His grand study, once a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, transformed into a frenetic hub of obsessive research. Books on 18th-century portraiture, historical biographies, and even obscure texts on folklore and local legends were strewn across every available surface. He became a man possessed, fueled by strong coffee and an unshakable conviction that the Lady of the Azure Veil was not just a painting, but a soul crying out from a forgotten past. His mission was no longer about aesthetic preservation, it was about liberation. He began by meticulously tracing the portrait's provenance, a task made challenging by its unassuming appearance at the estate sale. He delved into dusty archives, poring over brittle parish records, auction house catalogs, and forgotten society pages. His fingers grew stained with ink and age as he scoured microfiche for any mention of the Lady of the Azure Veil or its enigmatic artist. He sought information about the subject herself, a woman identified in one fleeting, faded invoice as Lady Eleanor Vance. The name echoed in his mind, carrying with it the weight of the haunting reflection. He spent countless hours cross-referencing names, dates, and locations, slowly piecing together fragments of a life swallowed by time. His reclusive nature, once a barrier, now served him well, allowing him to immerse himself completely, undisturbed by the outside world. He knew he was treading a path few would understand, a path that verged on the irrational, but the urgency in Eleanor's reflected eyes compelled him forward. His exhaustive research began to yield unsettling, fragmented truths. Lady Eleanor Vance, it turned out, had been a figure of considerable social standing in her time, known for her striking beauty and independent spirit. But her life, Elias discovered through hushed mentions in old diaries and censored newspaper articles, had taken a dark turn shortly after her portrait was completed. The official record stated she had simply disappeared, a polite euphemism that Elias now understood to be a chilling lie. Whispers of a scandal, a broken engagement to a powerful, vindictive nobleman, and a possible secret love affair with a less suitable, perhaps even dangerous individual, began to surface through the veiled language of the past. The artist commissioned for the portrait, a man named Alaric Finch, was equally perplexing. After the completion of the Lady of the Azure Veil, Finch's name vanished entirely from public record. No other known works, no death certificate, no mention of his whereabouts. It was as if both artist and subject had been erased from history, their stories silenced, perhaps even deliberately buried. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This wasn't a simple disappearance. It was an active concealment, a deliberate act of historical erasure. The portrait, he now suspected, was not just a depiction, but a testament to a profound injustice. As Elias delved deeper into the historical abyss, the reflections in the antique mirror intensified. They were no longer fleeting glimpses of sorrow or faint pleas. The woman, whom Elias now unequivocally identified as Eleanor Vance, manifested with greater clarity and for longer durations, her expressions more pronounced, her silent agony more palpable. Her serene, painted smile in the original portrait felt like a cruel mockery, a mask designed to hide a terrible truth. In the mirror, her face contorted with a fear that was almost visceral, her eyes wide with a terror that made Elias's own heart pound. He saw flashes of anger, a silent, impotent rage at her predicament, her lips pressing together in frustration. More disturbingly, she began to make subtle yet deliberate attempts to interact with her reflected environment. Her reflected hand, once clasped demurely, would sometimes lift, her fingers splaying as if to point. Her gaze would dart around the reflected study, lingering on specific objects, a heavy tome on the bookshelf, a particular pattern in the rug, or even the ornate frame of the mirror itself. These were not random movements. They were purposeful, desperate gestures of communication. Elias, his mind now fully attuned to her silent language, watched with rapt attention. He started to record these manifestations, sketching her gestures, noting the objects her reflected gaze fell upon. He spent hours simply sitting before the mirror, his own reflection a silent companion to Eleanor's spectral presence. There was a desperate urgency in her movements, a silent scream for help that resonated deeply within him. He felt a profound sense of responsibility, as if he were the only one who could hear her. It was during one particularly intense vigil, as the last vestiges of twilight bled into the room, that Elias noticed a recurring motif, a subtle pattern in Eleanor's reflected communication. It was a slight, almost imperceptible gesture of her left hand, a gentle, repetitive tap of her ring finger against her palm, always accompanied by a fleeting, intense focus on a specific, small detail within the reflected painting itself. In the original portrait, this detail was utterly unremarkable, just a part of the background, perhaps a fold in the azure veil or a shadow in the drapery. But in the mirror, it seemed to glow with an unseen significance, a silent beacon in Eleanor's desperate, mirrored world. Elias felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the clue, the hidden message she had been trying to convey. The key to her prison, he now believed, lay not in the grand sweep of history, but in the minute, almost invisible details of the painting itself, revealed only through the unsettling magic of the mirror. He was no longer merely a researcher, he was a detective, and Eleanor was his silent, spectral informant. The stakes had never been higher, and Elias knew with a chilling certainty that he was very close to uncovering a truth that had been buried for centuries. The weight of her desperate hope now rested squarely on his shoulders. He had to succeed. The subtle shifts in expression had evolved, transcending mere emotional nuance, becoming a complex, desperate language. The entity in the mirror, now unequivocally Lady Eleanor Vance, began to communicate with a chilling yet captivating directness that defied all rational explanation. Her nonverbal communication was becoming increasingly sophisticated, A silent pantomime played out across the reflective surface of the antique looking-glass. Elias would observe her slender hands, once elegantly posed in the original portrait, now moving with purpose in the reflection. She would form rudimentary shapes, a tightly clenched fist perhaps signifying anger or constraint, an open palm denoting release or a desperate plea for help. More strikingly, her delicate fingers would point, sometimes towards the ornate, carved leg of his study desk, other times to the spine of a particular leather-bound volume on the overflowing shelves, or even to the very gilded frame of the portrait itself, as if trying to draw his attention to a specific, crucial detail. Her azure eyes, once pools of serene beauty, now blazed with an urgent, almost frantic intensity, conveying messages of alarm, frustration, and an undeniable yearning for comprehension. Elias spent countless hours, often well into the pre-dawn silence, meticulously documenting every gesture, every pointed glance, every subtle shift in her reflected posture, trying to build a lexicon of her silent pleas. It was an arduous, emotionally taxing endeavor, but one he found himself utterly incapable of abandoning. An intense, almost unbearable emotional connection was forging between Elias and the reflected Eleanor, binding him to her plight. He no longer saw her merely as a historical subject or a supernatural phenomenon to be studied from a distance. She was a genuine presence, a soul in profound distress, and he felt her despair and frustration as if they were his own, a phantom ache in his chest. Her reflected pain resonated deep within him, stirring a profound sense of protectiveness and an overwhelming compulsion to alleviate her suffering. His once strictly rational mind, a fortress built on logic and empirical evidence, now struggled to reconcile the impossible reality unfolding before him. Yet, the raw, undeniable empathy he felt for her transcended all attempts at scientific detachment. He found himself speaking to the reflection, his voice a low, soothing murmur in the quiet study, filled with genuine concern. "What is it, Eleanor? What are you trying to tell me? Show me again, please." He would ask questions, sometimes aloud, sometimes silently, his gaze locked with hers in the mirror, trying to decipher the intricacies of her silent pleas. He felt an almost paternal need to understand, to bridge the impossible chasm between their realities, to offer solace, and more importantly, to offer aid. The isolation of his reclusive life had suddenly been shattered, replaced by an intimate, if surreal, partnership with a ghost. While the original Lady of the Azure Veil portrait remained outwardly unchanged, a static masterpiece of 18th century artistry, Elias began to perceive profound shifts in its emotional aura, a subtle darkening of its inherent light. The serene expression which had initially drawn him in with its timeless beauty now felt like a carefully constructed mask, a beautiful facade designed to conceal deeper turmoil and a profound, lingering sadness. The azure veil itself, the delicate blue fabric that draped around her shoulders, seemed to shimmer with a faint, almost imperceptible unease, a visual echo of the distress reflected in the mirror. He would stand before the painting, then turn to the mirror comparing the two images, and the contrast was stark, heartbreaking in its implications. The painting was a beautiful, elegant lie, a frozen moment of forced tranquility, a perfect illusion. The mirror, however, was a true window, a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the tormented reality of the woman trapped within. He understood now, with a chilling clarity that settled deep in his bones, that the canvas was not merely a representation, it was a prison, an enchanted cage, and the mirror, by some unknown cosmic accident or arcane design, offered the only conduit to her suffering, the only chance for her voice to be heard, however faintly. The stakes were escalating rapidly, consuming Elias's entire existence with a relentless grip. He began to neglect his health, his once meticulous routines crumbling under the relentless weight of his obsession. Meals were forgotten, sleep became a luxury he could no longer afford, his other valuable art restoration projects lay abandoned, gathering dust in his workshop, their former allure completely lost. His entire life revolved around the enigmatic Lady Eleanor Vance and her desperate reflections, a singular focus that narrowed his world to the confines of his study. A growing urgency emanated from Eleanor in the mirror, a palpable sense of time running out, of a precarious situation teetering on the brink of an unseen collapse. Her gestures became more emphatic, her eyes wider, her reflected anguish more profound, almost screaming silently for release. Elias realized with a jolt that went through him like an electric current that her presence in the mirror was not merely a haunting, a spectral echo of the past, but a desperate, immediate cry for help. It was a plea for liberation from a forgotten or overlooked injustice, a silent scream against a confinement that continued to hold her captive across centuries. He felt an immense pressure, a heavy burden of responsibility settling upon his shoulders, a weight that became heavier with each passing moment. He was her last hope, her only advocate in a world that had long forgotten her plight, dismissing her as a mere historical footnote. The mystery had deepened into a profound, undeniable mission, a calling to right a historical wrong, to free a soul from its beautiful painted cage. The quiet solitude of his study had transformed into an emotional battleground, and Elias, armed only with his intellect and burgeoning empathy, was ready to fight for Eleanor's freedom, no matter what dark secrets he had yet to uncover or what personal cost he might have to pay. His heart pounded with a mixture of fear and fierce determination, knowing that the journey ahead would test the very limits of his sanity and courage, pushing him beyond anything he had ever known. The reflection beckoned, a silent siren call towards an unknown destiny, and Elias, utterly compelled, could do nothing but follow. The insidious nature of the haunting had fully consumed Elias. His days were a blur of intense focus, his nights punctuated by fleeting sleep, often disturbed by vivid dreams of Eleanor's pleading eyes. He spent countless hours in his study, the antique mirror reflecting not just the lady of the azure veil, but his own gaunt, obsessed face. He watched, he listened, he spoke, his voice a low, constant murmur in the hushed room, interpreting every subtle shift in Eleanor's reflected form. Her gestures, once fleeting and ambiguous, began to coalesce into a coherent, if still nonverbal language. It was a painstaking process, a silent, desperate dance between two souls separated by centuries and an impossible barrier. Elias learned to read the slight tilt of her head, the specific way her fingers might curl, the direction of her gaze, cross-referencing each observation with the mountain of historical documents he had amassed. Through this relentless, almost maddening dedication, the true, horrifying nature of Eleanor's plight slowly unfurled before him. She was not merely a tragic figure who had disappeared. She was a prisoner, her very essence ensnared within the canvas. The portrait, this exquisite piece of art he had so admired, was not a celebration of her beauty, but a meticulously crafted magical artifact, a gilded cage designed to contain her spirit. The serene smile, the tranquil eyes, the elegant posture, all were a cruel masquerade, a visual lie masking a profound and agonizing captivity. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his bones as the full weight of this revelation pressed down upon him, turning his beloved art into an instrument of torment. His historical research, previously focused on mundane details of Eleanor's life and the artist's career, now took on a sinister new light. The vague rumors of scandal, the sudden disappearance, the artist's abrupt withdrawal from public life, it all clicked into place with chilling precision. Eleanor Vance had not vanished of her own accord, nor had she been a willing subject in her eternal confinement. She had been betrayed, not by some distant enemy, but by someone intimately close to her, a jealous suitor, or perhaps a vindictive family member. This individual, consumed by possessiveness, or a desire for revenge after Eleanor's rejection, or the discovery of a dark secret, had sought out an artist who was not merely a painter, but a practitioner of forbidden, dark arts. This nefarious artist, driven by greed or perhaps a twisted sense of loyalty to the betrayer, had woven a powerful enchantment into the very fabric of the portrait. The oils, the canvas, the pigments themselves were imbued with a sinister magic, designed to trap Eleanor's living soul within its confines, silencing her forever. The Lady of the Azure Veil was not just a painting, it was a living tomb, a permanent silencing spell. The mirror, Elias now understood with a jolt of terrifying clarity, was not a catalyst for the haunting, but an unintended flaw in the enchantment, a temporary portal. Its reflective surface, inadvertently placed opposite the portrait, created a weakness in the dark magic, allowing Eleanor's imprisoned essence to manifest, to reach out, however subtly, into the world beyond her painted prison. It was a desperate plea from within her gilded cage, a silent scream resonating across the centuries. The recurring gesture, the one Elias had observed countless times, the slight, almost imperceptible movement of her reflected hand, or the way her eyes would briefly fixate on a particular spot, was not random. It was a hidden clue, a desperate attempt to guide him. He knew, with an intuitive certainty that transcended logic, that this gesture pointed to a specific detail within the original portrait itself, not a detail visible to the naked eye, not a prominent feature, but something layered, concealed beneath the final glazes, or perhaps a unique material used in a certain part of the canvas, a thread, a pigment, a subtle variation in the weave that held the key to her release. It was a secret cipher, embedded within the art itself, waiting for the right eye to perceive it, the right mind to decipher its arcane meaning. Eleanor's goal was clear, though unspoken. She yearned for freedom from her painted prison, not just for herself, but to expose the heinous crime of her captor, to bring to light the injustice that had stolen her life and condemned her to an eternity of silent observation. She wanted to find the peace that had been so cruelly denied to her. She needed Elias, the reclusive art restorer, to break the ancient, dark enchantment. This required not only his unparalleled understanding of art and its composition, but also a leap into the terrifying realm of arcane knowledge to comprehend the dark magic woven into the canvas. He was her last, impossible hope, the only one who had truly seen her, truly listened to her silent cries. The weight of her salvation, of centuries of injustice, now rested squarely on his shoulders. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was no longer a matter of art history or academic curiosity. It was a desperate mission of liberation, one he was compelled to undertake, whatever the cost. Elias, now fully armed with the chilling knowledge of Eleanor's tragic plight and the insidious nature of her painted prison, understood with absolute clarity that the path to her liberation lay not in simple art restoration, but in a delicate, precise, and profoundly dangerous act of magical intervention. He returned to his study, the weight of centuries of injustice pressing down on him, his gaze fixed on the Lady of the Azure Veil, the recurring gesture, that almost imperceptible movement of Eleanor's reflected hand, the way her eyes would briefly fixate on a particular spot in the mirror, now coalesced into a singular, undeniable truth. After countless hours of observation, cross-referencing her subtle cues with the arcane texts he had unearthed, Elias finally deciphered the hidden symbol. It wasn't a symbol painted on the canvas, but rather a specific, minute point within the canvas itself, a place where the artist, the dark practitioner, had embedded a unique, almost microscopic thread of silver, a conductor, a focal point for the malevolent enchantment. Eleanor's reflected gaze had consistently, desperately, drawn his attention to the delicate lace cuff on her left sleeve, a detail so seemingly innocuous, yet now revealed as the linchpin of her eternal confinement. This was no ordinary restoration, no gentle cleaning or careful relayering of pigment. This was a ritual, a perilous dance between the precision of an art master and the chilling unknown of forbidden magic. Elias knew he had to undo the enchantment, not destroy the portrait, for to destroy it would be to destroy Eleanor's last vestige of existence, trapping her forever in oblivion. His artistic skills, honed over decades, were now mere instruments in a far grander, more terrifying endeavor. He meticulously prepared his tools, not just his finest sable brushes and solvents, but also a specific ancient silver stylus he had found among his ancestors' artifacts, its tip sharpened to an almost impossible point, its metal rumored to have properties that could disrupt ethereal energies. He also needed a specific light, a beam of concentrated moonlight filtered through a prism to illuminate the exact point on the canvas without causing damage. And yes, the research had yielded a faint, barely decipherable incantation, a counterspell whispered in the forgotten tongue of the arcane, a sequence of words meant to unravel, not destroy, the binding magic. He had practiced it in hushed tones, the foreign syllables feeling strange and heavy on his tongue, each word a step further into a world he had only ever dismissed as myth. As Elias began the process, the air in the study grew heavy, crackling with an unseen energy. He positioned the filtered moonlight, casting a luminous circle directly onto the lace cuff. With a deep, shuddering breath, he raised the silver stylus, its tip hovering inches from the canvas. The moment he made contact, a surge of raw, untamed power erupted. The reflections in the antique mirror opposite became a maelstrom of distorted imagery. Eleanor's face, once a beacon of desperate hope, now contorted into a terrifying kaleidoscope of emotions. Raw fear, agonizing pain, fleeting moments of profound sorrow, and then a desperate, almost defiant surge of hope. Her image shimmered, stretched, and twisted, as if the very fabric of her being was being torn between two worlds. The study itself seemed to recoil from the unleashed magic. The gaslights flickered wildly, threatening to extinguish altogether, plunging the room into oppressive darkness. A sudden, drastic drop in temperature sent a chill deep into Elias's bones, and faint, disembodied whispers, like the rustling of ancient, brittle leaves, seemed to emanate from the very walls, swirling around him, attempting to break his concentration, to sow doubt and terror. He felt a distinct malevolent presence, an ethereal hand pushing against his will, the lingering influence of Eleanor's betrayer, or perhaps the enchantment's own formidable, protective magic, fighting back with every ounce of its sinister power. The battle for Eleanor's soul was not just occurring on the canvas, but within the very essence of the room, and within Elias's own mind. Elias felt the immense pressure, a crushing weight that threatened to buckle his knees. This was more than just a challenge to his skill, it was a profound personal risk. He knew with a terrifying certainty that failure could mean not only Eleanor's permanent damnation but also his own. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, promising madness, promising to trap his own spirit within the confines of the portrait, to bind him alongside Eleanor in an eternal, silent torment. He felt a chilling sensation, as if tendrils of ice were reaching for his mind, attempting to shatter his focus, to break his resolve. The thought of being consumed by the very magic he sought to undo, of becoming another forgotten soul trapped within the brushstrokes, was a horrifying prospect. Yet, he pushed past the paralyzing fear, past the desperate cries of his rational mind screaming for him to stop. He was driven by something far deeper, an unwavering commitment to Eleanor, a profound empathy for her centuries of suffering, and an unshakable belief in the justice he was compelled to deliver. His hand, though trembling, remained steady, guided by an unseen force, fueled by a singular, burning purpose. He began to recite the ancient incantation, his voice a low, resonant hum against the cacophony of the struggling enchantment, each word a declaration of defiance against the dark magic that had held Eleanor captive for so long. The true climax had begun. With a final desperate surge of adrenaline, Elias meticulously applied the last, almost imperceptible stroke. His hand, guided by Eleanor's spectral, reflected gestures and the ancient texts he had painstakingly deciphered, moved with the precision of a surgeon and the reverence of a priest. The hidden symbol, embedded beneath centuries of glaze and paint, shimmered faintly as his specially crafted tool, tipped with a rare conductive earth, made contact. He had found it, the precise point, the arcane nexus where the artist's dark enchantment was anchored. The air in the study thickened, heavy with an unseen, ancient energy. Eleanor's image in the mirror, which had been writhing and contorting through a terrifying gamut of emotions, fear, pain, desperate hope, suddenly stilled, her eyes wide, locked onto his. The room felt as if it held its breath, poised on the precipice of an unimaginable release. Then it happened. A brilliant, blinding flash of azure light erupted from the portrait, momentarily engulfing the entire study in an ethereal glow that pulsed with raw, untamed power. It was not a destructive light, but one of pure, concentrated energy, vibrating through the very foundations of the old house. Elias felt a profound surge, a jolt that coursed through his body, vibrating in his very bones, as if he had become a conduit for millennia of trapped despair and sudden, overwhelming freedom. The energy hummed, a crescendo of soundless triumph, before dissipating as swiftly as it had appeared. In its wake, an absolute, profound stillness descended upon the room, a silence so deep it seemed to absorb all other sounds, all other thoughts. The flickering light stabilized, the temperature returned to normal, and the faint, chilling whispers that had plagued him for days vanished as if they had never been. Elias, momentarily stunned, blinked away the afterimage of the light. His gaze instinctively snapped to the antique gilded mirror. Eleanor's reflection was still there, but profoundly, wonderfully changed. The contortions were gone, the terror erased. Her face, once etched with the sorrow of ages, now held an expression of exquisite, ethereal peace. Her lips curved into a gentle, genuine smile, one that reached her eyes, radiating warmth and gratitude. It was a smile of true liberation, a soul finally unburdened. Slowly, gracefully, her image began to fade, not with a violent crackle or a sudden disappearance, but like a wisp of morning mist dissolving into the sun. Her eyes, filled with a silent, profound thank you, lingered for a moment longer, a final, poignant farewell, before her entire being dissolved into the mirror's silvered depths, leaving behind only the reflection of Elias's quiet study, utterly devoid of any spectral presence. She was gone, not into nothingness, but into the boundless peace she had so long been denied. Turning his attention back to the canvas, Elias approached the Lady of the Azure Veil with a reverence that bordered on awe. The original portrait had undergone a subtle yet undeniably profound transformation. The serene expression, which had once felt like a carefully constructed mask of polite society, now radiated an authentic, gentle peace. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her painted shoulders. Her striking blue eyes, which had held the captive sadness of her imprisonment, now shone with a newfound tranquility, a quiet joy that was utterly captivating. The eponymous azure veil, which had previously seemed to cling to her, almost obscuring her true essence, now appeared to shimmer and lift, revealing a true, untroubled beauty that had been hidden for centuries. The portrait was no longer a prison, a sinister artifact of dark magic. It had been reborn, transformed into a memorial, a testament to a life reclaimed, a silent monument to a soul finally at rest. Elias stood before the painting for a long time, a complex tapestry of emotions weaving through him. There was a profound sense of accomplishment, a deep satisfaction that resonated in his very core. He had not merely restored an antique canvas, he had liberated a soul, righted an ancient wrong, and brought peace to a woman trapped across centuries. Yet, intertwined with this triumph was a bittersweet farewell. He had grown intimately connected to Eleanor, to her silent pleas and her unwavering hope. Her presence, however ethereal, had become a part of his solitary life, and now she was truly gone. The silence in the study, once unsettling, now felt like a hallowed space, imbued with the echoes of a journey completed. The experience had changed Elias Thorne in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. He understood now, with an undeniable certainty, the thin, almost imperceptible veil that separated art from history, and history from the supernatural. His appreciation for the hidden stories within every artifact had deepened immeasurably. Every brushstroke, every faded pigment, every antique object now seemed to whisper of lives lived, secrets kept, and truths waiting to be uncovered. He had stepped beyond the realm of scholarly restoration and into a world where empathy could transcend time and where the human spirit, even when imprisoned, could find a way to cry out for justice. His journey with Eleanor had taught him that the most profound discoveries often lie not in what is immediately visible, but in the unseen, the unheard, and the patiently observed. This extraordinary journey, this dance between the tangible and the ethereal, reminds us that sometimes what we perceive with our eyes is only a fraction of the story. True understanding, genuine insight, requires us to look beyond the surface, to listen to the whispers of history, and to open our hearts to the hidden depths of empathy. It demands that we not only observe the world around us, but truly see it, truly feel it, even when that means gazing into the reflective depths of a mirror and recognizing a plea for help from a forgotten soul. What hidden stories do you think lie within your own antique treasures? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were captivated by Elias's journey, give this video a like, subscribe for more thrilling tales, and click here for our next mystery.